I have no problems if, as we probe the origins of things, we bump up into the bearded man. If that shows up, we're good to go. Okay? Not a problem. There's just no evidence of it. And this is why religions are called faiths, collectively. Because you believe something in the absence of evidence. That's what it is. That's why it's called faith. Otherwise, we would call all religions evidence. But we don't, for exactly that reason. So I'm given what everyone describes to be the properties that would be expressed by an all-powerful being in the gods that they worship. I look for that in the universe and I don't find it. So I remain unconvinced. But if you've got some good evidence, bring it, bring it, bring it, okay?
Do you believe him when he says that? He says he's perfectly happy to believe in God if science shows the need for God.
I don't think so. I suspect he has the same. I mean, I can't say this for sure, and I don't want to kind of say anything which is going to be incorrect about what he thinks. But Professor Dawkins was asked this question. He said, if God spoke to you in a booming voice saying, Richard, this is God speaking. I'm here to tell you that I exist. Congratulations, you've hit the jackpot. Okay. So, Richard Dawkins was asked that question and he replied, I think I would more likely to believe that that's a hallucination rather than God actually speaking to me, which makes his atheism unfalsifiable, which basically is a short way of saying that he's rigged his own belief system to not accept any evidence in favor of one particular position. And I suspect Neil deGrasse Tyson would do the same.
Yeah, and I think,
By the way, just as a quick aside, I do apologize, just a quick aside, I love the fact that he thinks there's no evidence for God, which we will get to, but he thinks that there's evidence for his simulation hypothesis.
Yeah, God. Yeah, he said it's quite likely that we're living in a giant simulation run by super intelligent aliens.
Yeah.
We did an article on that.
I think one of the points is that he's made is that it's called faith, and that's why it's called faith. And he's assuming that one, everybody's English, and secondly, everybody has the same concept of faith as he does.
Yeah.
So faith in Arabic, for example, is iman. It means something quite different to the connotations of faith in English. But,
So what has he said there? So he said that there is no evidence, and I think that's just completely absurd because, I mean...
That's why it's called faith. Otherwise it would be called evidence.
Right, but it's... he's saying that there's no scientific...
That's why it's called chemistry and not evidence. And that's why it's called physics and not evidence.
Yeah, that wasn't his best argument. But there's... I just find it...
You can't have categories of anything in life which is real unless it's called evidence, apparently. What's that? It's evidence. What's that? It's evidence.
That's a fair argument. That is a logical conclusion of his of what he's saying. But more to the point, is he's saying that there's nothing in modern science which would possibly lead you towards God, which is balmy. And he knows that there's been many people making precisely that argument, but he's not really going through the effort to at all critique it, and he generally doesn't. He generally, and let's generally, because he's certainly not the worst example of this, but let's say, modern scientists and new atheists in general, which he doesn't identify with, okay, just say he doesn't identify with that kind of label, but I feel he does pretty much fall into the methodological naturalist camp, which they all belong to, which is essentially the idea that the only things that you can appeal to in science and the only things that you can infer the existence of are dead things. So everything has to come back to natural law, which is operating mindlessly. So you can only explain things by reference to saying ultimately things at their base is natural law operating mindlessly, which is of course itself an actual form of faith.
Yeah.
Right. But so he kind of goes down that line. But if you have a look at what believers have been saying in the modern age, and we make this argument in many of our videos, is, well, look at, say, the Big Bang and the whole Big Bang cosmology, and in general that field. in so many different ways gets you back to the fact that there has to be a beginning to the universe, or whatever linear line of universes you have. There has to be a beginning moment beyond which, or prior to which, the universe didn't. Now, then you ask, okay, well, how was that created? Because it couldn't, or how did that come to be? Because it couldn't have just popped out of nothing. So when you see that, and you see that a lot of, well, all of our cosmology is saying there has to be some kind of initial moment of the universe prior to which it didn't exist, you ask, how did that come to be? It couldn't have just literally just popped out of nowhere. So there has to be something prior to which, causally prior to which is causing it. Okay, so there has to be something before the universe, if the universe is finite in age.
Yeah.
So is it another universe, or is it something else which was itself created? Well, I mean, that wouldn't make sense, because then you'd have to have something before that, and, or maybe there was, but whatever it is, you ultimately have to get back to something which is eternal, something which has always existed, which carries in itself the cause for its own existence, you could say, in the in one strand of philosophy. But basically something which has always existed, and which creates everything else.
The Aquinas strand.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's one way in which modern science, when you apply rational arguments to the observations of modern science, you come back to the fact that there has to be some eternal entity that has always existed. And that's the only way we can ultimately explain the origin of the universe.
And this is the category error I mentioned right at the beginning, which is similar to the category error I made with respect to suffering, that God is like created things and therefore should behave like created things. This is God is like the universe and therefore is subject to the same contingency arguments as applied to the universe. But if you accept that actually you need a non-contingent start, something that did not in itself have a cause, an uncaused cause, that you have to have one, once you accept that you have to have an uncaused cause, which a lot of atheists accept that you have to have an uncaused cause because it's a logical necessity, okay? Then you get to the question of what is the nature of that uncaused cause. So, the problem with people like Richard Dawkins is that they, especially with his God delusion argument on this, is that they don't actually formulate the argument correctly, and then they arguing against a straw man continuously. So instead of actually giving the proper Kalam cosmological argument, he gives, the universe is improbable, therefore requires God, but God who created the universe must necessarily be much more improbable. To which David Belinsky rightly asks in his book, The Devil's Illusion, the universe isn't improbable. The universe is only improbable if God doesn't exist. So you smuggled an atheistic premise to your entire argument. If God exists, then the universe is inevitable. It's not improbable.
There.
What's there?
I mean, absolutely. And but Tyson hasn't made this argument here, but he is making the general claim that there's no evidence in modern science that gets you to the bearded man, when actually there's a very long history of, in cosmology, some of the early cosmologists and astrophysicists, people in his own field who ultimately who discovered Big Bang cosmology, or rather pioneered Big Bang cosmology. One of them said that you could sum it all up in the opening lines of Genesis. That basically God created the universe.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
Yeah, I couldn't remember that. That's not good, is it?
You had going around your head. In the beginning, that God created the light, and the light. Something about the light. What was the light thing? I know you did.
No, wait, that's later. And then let's have a look at the whole of biology and the origin of life, which has been shown through so much biochemistry to be so incredibly improbable to have happened through natural causes, as to be basically impossible. Fred Hoyle postulated that the chance of having a cell coming together is 1 in 10 to the 40,000. So that's 1 in 10 with 40,000 zeros after it. Doug Axe then did some work on that, trying to make it more empirical, and I think he got to like 1 in 10 to the 41,000 and found that actually Hoyle was pretty much bang on, right? So which is pretty remarkable. But because he was only focusing on certain aspects of the improbability, the real improbability was much higher than that when you factor in all the different things.
Because you have unknown improbabilities.
Yeah, and also just the formation of lipids and the formation of all these kinds of different things that aren't necessarily taken into account there. So the origin of life is incredibly improbable, and then the whole evolution of life, where you have incredible biological complexity occurring through random mutation, through genetic typos, ultimately producing you and me talking here from an amoeba, when we've discovered that Darwinian evolution works by basically breaking genes, and that's incredibly that you can't, in the time frame available, make even minor, genuine progressive changes to proteins through random mutation if you need 2 or 3 coordinated mutations. And we've discussed this at length in much more detail in some of our previous videos. If you go on our evolution playlist. So I mean, we're just saying this kind of briefly and casually now.
But people watching this for the first time, they're like, it needs to be explored a bit more.
Some bold claims. And we've also got loads of
we've got whole playlists. We've got whole playlists and articles on this, absolutely.
And actually, best place is probably go to rationalreligion.co.uk/topic-index, or just go to rationalreligion.co.uk, go to the topic index at the top of the page, go down to evolution, you'll find all of our material on there. We've got a lot of written and video material on this. But the point that I'm making in an incredibly long-winded fashion is that it's false to say that there is nothing in science that's leading back to the existence of God. In fact, the best science that we've had and the great revolution of the 20th century is in showing that there is ample evidence for the traditional conception of God, in that there is an eternal entity that began the universe, which is intelligent and wise, and which is actually directing the operation of the universe in order to produce sentient life, which can then know, love, and worship God. Right,
we haven't even got to the question of the fine tuning of the universe, for example. And you've mentioned the origin of life, the evolution of life, and then the evolution of consciousness,
the appearance of language, which no one really explores.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I find particularly funny about cosmologists like Neil deGrasse Tyson is, on the one hand, they're like, "Oh, well, there's no evidence of God." But on the other, since the Big Bang, they've been trying to shoehorn the multiverse quietly into all of their basically mathematical models to try and explain away the necessity of God through the anthropic principle. So it's basically like going, "Oh, nothing to see here, nothing. There's no evidence of God from the Big Bang. Oh, have you seen this multiverse? It's stunningly interesting, this multiverse thingy. You don't need God."
Yeah, I mean, that's to get away from fine tuning, as you say.
It's to get away from fine tuning, which is a major discovery of the 20th century.
Some forms of multiverse come from inflationary theory, which wasn't designed to get rid of fine tuning per se, to my understanding. But the forms which do try and get rid of the fine tuning and probabilities are much greater extrapolations, which aren't evidenced at all.
We haven't even got to the main form of evidence, in fact, and this is what I wanted to mention, if I may.
Granted.
Okay, which really is that, what greater form of evidence could he want than people from every culture in every age who are regarded as the best in all of their human societies coming forward saying that God has appointed me as a messenger to you. He speaks to me, and he has told me this fundamental message, that be good to your neighbor, worship him alone, and make him as a focal point of your life, and that there will be a reckoning after your death of some sort. Okay, and shun the, as it says in the Quran, we sent a messenger unto every people saying, worship your Lord, shun the evil one. Okay, worship Allah, shun the evil one. So this is the Quran says this is a fundamental message that we gave to every single nation on earth. Okay, and every single culture and nation you look at throughout all of the millenniums of human history since the agricultural revolution, basically, you have people who are regarded as the best in their society, to the extent that, and I'm emphasizing this point, to the extent that, okay, even the man to which all of these, especially Western scientists, hail as their father of philosophy, Socrates, even he said that God speaks to me and communicates to me, and that he tells me and directs me where to go and what to do and when to not speak and what action to take. Such that in Plato's Plato's Republic, but the Apology in particular, which is his court case,
it's in the Apology.
It's heavily in the Apology. The last line of the Apology is that basically I give myself up to God and whatever God wants.
To God,
and Phaedo, which is his time in prison. Have these people ever read these books? I mean, do they just quote them? Is it just to make themselves sound smart? I mean, it actually infuriates me. I don't know if you can tell if I'm angry or not, but it infuriates me.
You like the Hulk, you're always angry.
You know, it actually infuriates me. These people talk about Plato and Socrates effectively to people like Neil deGrasse Tyson. They quote these people as if they belong to them. They don't belong to them. Okay. Socrates claimed revelation from God very explicitly, repeatedly. Okay. And said that he had been commissioned by God to be a gadfly on the back of Athens to prompt them towards good moral behavior.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he taught against all the Greek gods. That was the thing that they actually charged him with, and yet believed in God, one God.
Yeah, I mean that was a hilarious
Antisthenes, who is pretty much his main disciple, not Plato. Plato wasn't his main disciple. Plato was just the most verbose of his disciples. Antisthenes was his main spiritual disciple, and he is mentioned in Cicero as believing in one God. Well, where did he get that idea from? Probably the man he spent his life with. Yeah,
absolutely. So, this is actually the great tragedy of Western philosophy, is that they totally and utterly discount the revelatory and religious aspect of Socrates and only want to take from his the very dilute and very materialistic positions of Aristotle. And this is an actual fact what poisoned the Muslim intelligentsia throughout the centuries of what's regarded as the Muslim Golden Age, is the fact that they worshipped Aristotle over the message of the Quran.
Well, I mean, not all of them did, but there was certainly a strong trend of that. I mean, Ibn al-Haytham did the whole doubts movement. There was a lot of work against the
there's
Greeks,
the Shukuk movement. Absolutely, there was.
But you're right that they were too beholden to it. Absolutely. I mean, that's undoubted, impossible to doubt. But the point that you're making here generally, because you went on to Greek philosophy and talking about Socrates, and the point you're making is that every culture on Earth has great religious, spiritual pioneers and religious people that whose names are still celebrated today, who said essentially the same thing: worship one God, shun the evil one, i.e., worship one God and do good to others. And that book, Revelation, Rationality, Knowledge and Truth, by Hazrat Mirza Tahir Ahmad, which we'll put in the link below, goes through showing how quite clearly Buddha believed in God, how Confucius believed in one God, how Lao Tzu talked about it as well, talked about one God, and that there is actually good evidence amongst the Aboriginals that they have the same beliefs. Native Americans, when you look into their beliefs, they ultimately have pretty similar beliefs. So there's good evidence that in all these ancient cultures you had essentially the same beliefs with local modifications for the local peoples, which after thousands of years become interpolated, become changed, etc. And the whole Muslim belief is that, the Quran says to every people we sent a messenger. Every people we sent a messenger. But that Islam has come as the final religion, the consummate religion. And these other religions will have been so interpolated and weren't meant for all times, but Islam is the religion that's been preserved. I think
the key point.
Can I just because I wanted to try and explain the context, and what you're saying is even in Western culture they have this as well, because their philosophy comes from Socrates. He is essentially the intellectual founder of Western civilization, and he claimed divine revelation.
Yes.
And I suspect he's greatly underrepresented his religious aspects in Plato, by the mere fact that as I said, Antisthenes was his great disciple, the one who was known to be most committed to him. And after Socrates died, he had a spiritual following, and he taught spirituality, and he believed in one God. So I think he's the real bearer of the flame.
Absolutely. And there was, I think a really good point to make is the one that Mirza Ghulam Ahmad made, which is that these people who make these kinds of arguments that religion has no evidence, on the one hand, they are unwilling to follow the path of those individuals who claimed to have spoken to God and God spoke to them and manifested himself to them. They're unwilling to follow those religious paths and those religious teachings. So unwilling to undertake the hypothesis that leads to the experimental conclusion. Mm-hmm. Okay. And on the other hand, they're unwilling to believe them, regarding them either as liars or deluded. So you can't take both positions. That I'm not going to try and follow the path that leads potentially to the fulfillment of this hypothesis, and on the other hand, I'm not even going to believe the person who has done that path and tells me what the conclusion is. So there's that as well. And I think the final point is that in court cases, the highest form of evidence is what? It's eyewitness testimony. And what we have is, from the people who are considered best in all of their societies, universally in time and space, we have the same consistent message coming out from all of these individuals, who then, as a result, became the founders of civilizations. The history of the world is not the history of the Jeff Bezos and the Elon Musks and the Joe Rogans of this world. Okay, this is not the history of the world. The history of the world is the history of the prophets of God and those people who came with a spiritual message, not a technological one, actually. Because actually what shapes human life more than anything else, it's moral behavior.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a thought which flew out of my mind. Some people may say, well, why do you have to have this kind of, why do I have to rely on eyewitness testimony or witness testimony of prophets? Why do I have to follow a spiritual path? Why doesn't God just reveal himself? And I just wanted to point out that that kind of evidence would be inappropriate for God and for God's purpose. A, God is not a physical being, so you're not going to see him with your physical eyes. And B, he has hidden himself to a degree so that there has to be some form of effort to appreciate and to truly know his existence. On the intellectual plane, you can certainly infer the existence of God, and that's one level of certainty, but it's a much lower level of certainty. It's essentially I think God must exist or should exist. On the balance of probabilities, it makes much more sense that God exists than he doesn't exist. And that's what we do from looking at, for instance, that there must be an eternal entity, there must be an intelligent designer. That's all the rational things, but or rather the physical kind of things, the physical evidence that we can infer from. But ultimately, God wants us to go down the spiritual path and to manifest our worth and, have a degree of uncertainty that we have to break through effort, because it's by doing that we generate love for God and we see God's value and God's worth, and we show that actually we want to reach God. So that's just, I wanted to point that out because I know there'll be some people saying, well, why do I have to follow the path of these spiritual teachers in order to have personal evidence for God?
Well, you could say the same thing about becoming a doctor. Why do you have to do a 6-year medical course? That's because you actually need to know some stuff before you become a doctor. Okay? Yeah. Because actually it is a station which requires you to have certain qualifications, and those qualifications are met by learning. And similarly, the station of being the beloved of God, such that the creator of the universe speaks to you, which is a damn sight higher than being a medical doctor, funnily enough, should take at least as long as completing a medical degree. People want to put in so much effort with respect to their worldly life. They're willing to pay off a mortgage for 25 years. They're willing to give their labor over to the banks
just so they can say they're a homeowner.
Just to say they're a homeowner. But when it comes to like worshiping God or having a relationship with God or undergoing any kind of trial or suffering, they're just up in arms. But no, that's my point. They don't actually, there's a complete massive disparity, because actually what they don't want is they don't actually want to apply the same standard to their worldly life as they do to their spiritual life, because actually what they want is they want God to be their servant. They want actually God to come to them because they actually feel entitled that God should come to them because they think they're so wonderful. So it's like, well, why didn't God manifest himself to me? I'm such a nice person, And that's, I think that's part of what drives it. Maybe that's a bit judgmental, but that's me.
No, I mean, ultimately the greatest sin in all religions is pride, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
That sense of arrogance of I'm so great. Why did God not reveal himself to me? Well,
yeah,
maybe there's an issue with you, and you should seek to address it and come nearer to God.
Yeah, I mean, God, Allah says that in the Quran very clearly. They say, why doesn't God, reveal himself to us? Okay, I'm paraphrasing, obviously. Why does God not reveal himself to us? And Allah says, Allah knows best where to place his message. God knows best who to address it to. Or it says, why was this message of the Quran not given to a man from among the two great cities of Taif, of Mecca? It doesn't name Taif and Mecca. It says one of the two great cities. Why wasn't it in Arabia? Why wasn't it given to one of these top chiefs? Why was it given to a person who'd lost his mother, his father, and had basically spent his youth, although he's from a noble family, pretty poor. He was a poor man. Okay. So, why wasn't it given to, who the person, Umar bin Hisham, who became known as Abu Jahl? Why wasn't it given to Abu Sufyan? Why wasn't it given to one of these great chiefs? That was the question. And in today's age, with Mirza Ghulam Ahmad coming, the founder of the Ahmadiyya community, who claimed to be the messenger, the messiah of Islam, who had come to revive the true teachings of Islam. Again, this is the question the Muslims have now asked of him, just as the Jews asked of Jesus. Who are you? You're just born in some village. Well, this man who was born in some village, he started a movement that has utterly, revived and brilliantly brought to life the true Islamic morals in society, and has established a movement which is spreading all over the world as a result.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So ultimately, we're saying that Neil was short-sighted in his comments when he said that there's no evidence taking us back to God, because when you apply reason to the findings of modern science, and I think we'll do a whole lecture on this actually. It's not maybe not in the podcast, I don't know, but you certainly do come back to God, and we've already spoken about this in many different ways. So he's ignoring that, and the final thing he says is that that's why it's called faith and evidence, and you've already quite suitably mocked this, which and it's very true. It's he basically says that religion equals faith, and faith equals no evidence, right? And he's got this conception from Western culture in which Christianity is dominant, and he's right insofar as that is pretty much the poor line view of faith. Now, some Christians don't agree with it, although they wouldn't explicitly disagree with it, but they there are many Christians who say, well, we have all this scientific evidence. But essentially, Paul said that faith is not something which has to be on the basis of reason. Whereas in Islam, we have we don't have the same idea of faith in that way. We have the idea of iman. And iman, which is translated as faith, really means belief on the basis of probability without having certainty. And that's pretty much all of our scientific belief. Their beliefs on the basis of, well, this is probably true, but we're not 100% sure about it. But we're going to still act as if it's true, and we're going to proceed down this path. And that's what faith is, which is iman in the Islamic terminology.
It doesn't end with that.
Right. It's saying use that as your foundation. So you see certain signs. You see, well, this prophecy's come true. There are these reasons to believe in God from science. These prophecies have come true. I've seen the moral behavior of believers. On the basis of probability, I think actually this religion is true, but I don't know for sure. I haven't had personal experience from God. Well, the prophets have all said, follow my path, and you will have that personal experience through dreams, through answered prayers. And as you ascend that ladder up towards God, that the currency of your faith turns into certainty. And you have to keep going because, it is a long path. But actually, I think people will be somewhat surprised as to how quickly they can see some form of results.
Yeah, months. Sometimes I've seen weeks in people.
Yes, yeah, same. And we've actually got a fantastic article on this from Hamad Khan, who is one of our writers on our blog on rationalreligion.co.uk called How to Find God. So please do check that article out.